Okay, so I'm coming back in here, starting a new timer, starting a fresh clock. I'm on page 5. Hey, by the way, it looks to me like you shifted down to 10 point or 11 point from 12 point. Stay within. You can keep it for the final draft, but stay within the limits. Did I might have green lighted this? I can't recall. Sometimes I would give students authorization to change the typeface to get more into the number of pages. I don't recall doing that here, but in general, make sure if you have if you're given specific instruction, 1 inch margin, 12-point type, Times New Roman typeface, don't deviate from it. This looks to me like this paper got 20% longer on me. So these things get noticed. At the end of the first paragraph on page 5, I make some changes. They're cosmetic, but the way I see you're trying to do it is set up these questions and so on. Just we have to play around with that and make sure it flows well. Obviously, I think Pasquetti is just trash. Really low quality. I wouldn't even call it scholarship. It's mostly just opinion and journalism and slanted journalism, heavily biased journalism. I have no trouble with, you can disagree with me on that. You can come back at me with reasons I'm wrong. But don't just automatically think because you got something in a peer-reviewed journal it's good. There's tons of garbage in peer-reviewed journals. Just trash tier writing. I've just got a lot of trouble with this stuff, and I kind of unload at the end of the section. I'm on page 6 now. And you can follow the comments there. At the end of page 6 at the bottom, you've got a short paragraph. An intelligent community understands that Muslim thought divides Islam into two abodes. That's good. And there's a dual doctrine where half the faith is a faith of relationships between conflict and cooperation. Then you've got Sunni Shiites, ISIL and Al-Qaeda, for example, all together, and the other half, all out call to war, ISIL. So I have a lot of comments in there. When you use the term one half, do you mean strictly speaking 50%? You have to think that through. A reader might not understand that. That half of the entire Muslim population will wane exactly the other half is the other way. The term faith of relationship resting between conflict and cooperation is murky. I don't really understand it. And then you've got Sunni Shiites, ISIL and Al-Qaeda. Note that Al-Qaeda has a lowercase a when it's not at the front of the sentence, at least in the style books I've looked at. It's a confusing grouping. 3 of them are Sunni. One of them is Shiite. Sunni, not Shiite. And you've got Sunnis and Shiites, which ostensibly, right, are the Dua, not necessarily jihadi, but you're talking about them as an entire group. And then you've got two other groups that are definitively jihadi. The grouping doesn't make a lot of sense to me as I'm trying to fathom out what you're saying there, trying to say there. I'm on page 7. The last line of this section, I don't really understand why it's there. Typically, if you have an exhibit, I didn't put a comment in on this, but you're on page 7 with an exhibit, and the exhibit itself is 2 pages down. I know some academic articles will have an appendix where they put in the figures. It will be better here if you put the figure in the text, so the reader doesn't have to wonder where it is. First of all, if you have the exhibit in a different place, you should say what page to turn to if you have it on a different page, if you have no choice. But you've got space here, so I would suggest you move the figure up to page 7, and that'll be easier for the reader. On the synthesis, I don't understand how we have a wealthy, educated, enlightened Muslim class if they're into jihad or extremism. That is the antithesis of enlightenment. On page 8, we're getting through this thing. You've got some history on the Crusades here. I think we have to be careful with what histories we consider definitive. certainly the early Crusades, there's a lot of conflict over. Difficult to say with any certainty what's what at this point. Ideology grudge. You could say religious grudge, but also it wouldn't be an old ideology grudge. It would be an ideological grudge if you stick with that word. I meant to put that comment in. And we're done there. I might just zip back up here a couple pages and just comment too on page 6 here. My frustration with Pasquetti attempting to make it sound sinister that the Israelis are favoring a particular group. But you turn it around and say, you know, Israel is willing to fully integrate groups who are willing to be peaceful members of society, who are willing to respect the laws of civil society. I don't see how, in order to preserve survival, you know, clamping down on a group that's hostile to one, it's what anybody would do in that situation. And of course, some innocent people are going to get caught in that dragnet, and that's unfortunate. But the alternative is just death and people being blown up and stabbed. It's not, you know, it's not a trade-off any of us would make if our own families were at risk. And also, you know, claiming that the practice of having people inform, you know, the informant thing. Well, two things. First of all, people don't have to inform; they choose to inform. That's one thing. And I understand there's leverage. Sometimes you'll see situations where, you know, in the kind of policing we do in America, where a cop will put weight on somebody and say, if you don't inform, you're going to lose your public housing. I'll, you know, file charges for obstructing justice, kind of thing, right? So yeah, there are underhanded and deceitful ways to get people to be informants, but that's actually not what we're talking about here. So you're talking about the damage that's being done, but it's ignoring the damage that's being done by acts of conspicuous terror. I don't know. I liken it somewhat. I mean, if somebody took a job. If in a hypothetical situation, right, somebody took a job at a death camp somewhere and participated, you know, as an undercover agent, and then came out and wrote a book about how it's a terrible thing because the people who work in the death camp are suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome. You're missing the point. It's the people in the death camp, you know, who are really suffering, right? I'm not the concern about, you know, the effect that the informant network has on the emotional fragility of people living in Lod. I don't know that really rises to the emotional trauma of people who have their family members murdered. That seems to me to be where concern should be. In any event, I'm obviously down on Pasquetti. I don't respect her as a scholar in the slightest. And I've had other students. I had at least one other student I know 2 semesters ago bring in, I think, this exact paper too. So I've seen this thing before. Anyway, you're free to disagree with me. It's you know, part of the whole process of academia is that we're supposed to go back and forth on these things and have animate and thoughtful conversations about them. So that's fine. I'm perfectly prepared to respect your defended position when you buttress it with some good logic. That's our time on this. I think I got through the things I wanted to get through on this paper, so I will shut it down here. All right, thanks.